makes people truly fulfilled? Is it love, family, success? Or is it finding out who you really are, what you are truly made of? So you know your purpose here on Earth and your connection to the universe. We exist as physical beings in a physical reality, while our mind is in constant communication with unseen forces in unknown worlds. We are the visible part of a potentially infinite, invisible realm. How do the two worlds, mind and matter, coexist, collide, and interact?
Because the energy is all around us and energy is all connected to all different types of energy, you can communicate with all types of different things.
In your head, you just need to think, please may I turn my energy on, or anything like that, a trigger of energy, and then just turn it on.
And to Joseph.
It's quite a warm sensation inside your body, it's quite tingly. And then your subconscious mind kind of realises it.
As a kid, I met him down this like alleyway, and ever since we've been playing in my head or somewhere else.
But he speaks energy, it doesn't speak our language.
Like many children, when I was young, I was very, very sensitive. Even at the age of 5, I realized I could perceive the subtle energy. I would look at someone and I would see the energy around them. I could feel the emotions, what they were going through. I would put my hand up and I could hear their thoughts sometimes. That got me on a journey of discovery and research in the field of consciousness. How consciousness works in the physical world and how we can answer some of these questions. For example, when we sense the presence of someone, but there's no one there, what are we tapping into? What are we coming in contact with? How can we perceive an event before it happens or remotely at a distance? Is it possible to change the chemistry of your body or even your DNA? How is it that you can move a physical object without any contact with this physical object? Or use your consciousness to see without your physical eyes?
The rain was tapping and the windows and the wind was banging.
These are the phenomena that we're exploring here with a new scientific approach that could potentially explain it all. And it turns out that this field that we call parapsychology is not only widespread, but it is universal.
I have about 100 articles published in journals, and each one of those usually reports between 1 to 5 or 6 experiments. So somewhere in the number of hundreds of experiments. In terms of people involved, a few thousand people, perhaps.
So I've studied probably numbering in the hundreds of cases. I've captured, I don't know how many dozens or hundreds of what we call EVPs, of recordings of voices.
There are actually many credible institutions around the world that have dedicated many years of research in this field of psi phenomena, or what we call parapsychology. There are programs in the government that ran for over 20 years with millions of dollars in funding, using psychic abilities, for example, to spy on a foreign government.
We know for a fact that the Russians were involved in this. We know for a fact that the Chinese were and are probably still involved.
The United States government and several other countries are more open-minded to this. Russia comes to mind.
The Japanese were very involved. In fact, Sony Corporation had a long ongoing parapsychology program.
We know our own CIA had been experimenting in psychic tests and abilities and projects like MK Ultra.
The Israelis had an interest in it and may still.
It's very well established.
If these credible institutions and governments around the world are dedicating so much research and funding into this field, you would think there's something there.
In graduate school in about 1970, I saw a banner on the wall that said, "Learn how to meditate." And I found out that I could debug the software I was writing in my nuclear physics studies in a meditation state much more accurately and quicker than I could if I were actually looking at the printouts. The lines that had errors in them were red, the others were black. And that kind of crashed my reality. Up until that time, like most physicists, I believed that if you couldn't measure it, then it didn't exist. So I would do experiments in that I could have one of these effects and then change a variable and then do it again and then change that variable a little more and do it again. From consciousness, your intent can modify future probability, can modify what happens in the physical world, which means that consciousness is the fundamental thing and the physical world is a derivative of consciousness. So I knew that consciousness theory should also contain physics theory.
I finished my neurosurgical training at Duke in 1987, and then I started work at Harvard Medical School after doing a fellowship in cerebrovascular neurosurgery, all along thinking I understood something about brain, mind, and consciousness. But that, of course, was the tremendous gift of my near-death experience, is finding out that what I thought was a worldview that we just assumed to be true is actually false, that consciousness is primordial. All of this emergent reality basically emerges from consciousness. And it opens the door to a tremendous amount of understanding about consciousness and the mind and the power that human beings have over their unfolding reality.
If consciousness is fundamental, where does the physical world end and consciousness begin?
The physical world is a product of the consciousness world. One is within the other. It's not an either-or. It's all one thing.
It isn't as though there's a physical world and there's a mental world. There's only one world. It's all consciousness. It's not just localized in there, it's everywhere. And it's also not in space, and it's not in time. It's somehow before space and time. That's what we mean by fundamental. Consciousness is a kind of a substance, a proto-substance perhaps, which is usually in a primordial, refined state that doesn't even appear to be matter or energy yet. But from that can emerge what we start seeing as a physical world. Just like ice can take on different phases, maybe we're talking about something like consciousness, which has different phases. So if consciousness is a continuum, then some forms of consciousness can appear to be hard matter.
Physicists of the 20th century in 1920 and 1930 pondered this quite a lot and concluded that consciousness must be there, even there was no direct way of detecting it. We could only see its physical effects. Consciousness as a whole can be described by the quantum attribute. It's just that the quantum attribute does not follow Newton's laws. It's not physical. It's an entirely different part of the description of matter in the universe.
If the physical world exists within consciousness, how come we can see one and not the other?
We see at Fort Meade working as a Mideast analyst. What I didn't know is I lived next door to the operations officer and training officer for the remote viewing unit. They invited me over to their offices and sat me down and said, well, what we do here is collect intelligence against foreign threats using a parapsychology discipline called remote viewing. We essentially want to invite you to become a psychic spy. The